I started out as a photographer in the mid-'80s, and I worked for about 6-7 years at Northeastern University. And right at that point when they were changing from traditional layout methods to digital, and I, 91, 92, saw an application called Photoshop. I got very involved with Photoshop very early on in 92. And I, in 93, moved to Japan, where I was, there's one line of text there says, Photoshop no Tatsujin, which is Photoshop expert. So I was a little bit of a celebrity in Japan for a little while. Unfortunately, the groupies were really like nerdy boys, and that didn't work. But I was co-authoring Photoshop books. It led to a co-authoring of a digital photography book, which led to access to certain levels of within Japanese business society of management in companies like Toyota. And I was consulting with Toyota about digital photography, and in a setting somewhat like what you see here, I suggested to one of the marketing execs, you know what, this is like 97, and I said, you know what Toyota do with this internet thing? We ought to do like this live from the field web documentary concept. We'll call it Toyota Off-Road and Online Presents. And, you know, surprisingly, I could communicate that in Japanese well enough, and number one. But number two, they were like, yeah, let's talk about that. And so they gave us a little bit of funding to develop the concept. And what it ended up becoming is this concept called One World Journeys. And we created this whole presentation for them. It was going to be really, truly an integrated marketing communications experience with the whole web-based storytelling as the hub. And it was going to be digital photography live from the field. And they loved it so much that they ended up not sponsoring it. However, I also had another client, Seiko Epson, and Seiko Epson did sponsor it. And for 2 years, you know, this is sort of my hitting a little bit of the internet gold rush. We got really nice sponsorship for 2 years to do something that was really cool and exploratory. And this was actually how I first connected with Tom Kennedy, because he was just getting the multimedia division of the Washington Post going. And they were early sponsors of the expeditions that we did. Now, the expeditions that we did, there were 6 of them that we did under the original One World Journey sponsorship with Epson, and they were, you know, quote unquote, for the time live from the field, in that we were documenting the story on about a 36 to 48 hour cycle, and from some pretty remote locations, Palmyra Atoll being, you know, perhaps one of the most remote. We were uploading digital assets, still photos, audio, even video, and we're talking 2000, 2001, via satellite phone. And then we had a home-based team taking that content and putting them into flash presentations, et cetera. And this was all without the benefit, of course, of things like YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, et cetera. So we were really looking for partnerships with people like the Washington Post to help, you know, spread the awareness of the content. The archives of the expeditions are still at oneworldjourneys.com, and some of it looks kind of dated given where we are today. But a lot of the core content is actually still very, very, very good. We used quality writers, quality journalists, what have you, to work on those projects. So 9/11 happened, the dot-bomb crash happened, so that kind of put the kibosh on the Seiko Epson sponsorship. And we were kind of left with, well, you know, how do we either find a way to make a living doing this, or else we find new jobs. And I didn't like that other alternative. And quite by happenstance, we happened to meet a filmmaker named Wes Skiles, who was producing a PBS series called Water's Journey. And Wes, at a presentation I made about the net, said, you know, I get what y'all are doing. And he has a very thick northern Florida accent. I couldn't really replicate it, but but it was a great moment when he said that, because what ended up happening was we got funding from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to create the web-based content for the PBS series. And this is a screen capture of the homepage. This was in late '92 that we created this. And what we did was we used the same approach for One World Journeys to tell the story. We were actually reporting live from the field, again in the context of what live meant in those days. And we were putting up quality photography, we were putting up quality audio dispatches, But not only did we create that content to report the journey, but we also created contextually related content as well, such as this interactive, which helps educate Floridians about how the Floridan aquifer works. So we're helping to augment the photo documentary, audio documentary content with these kind of visuals. We also provided educational resources, downloadable lesson plans in PDF format and so forth. And then came along the Society of Environmental Journalists 2003 awards program. And we were like, what the heck, let's enter it and see what happens. We won. And you know what was kind of cool about that is that we won against some other traditional media. I can't remember who else was entered at the time. I think NPR and others that you would recommend. But you know, sort of like, and so the comments that we got back from the judging, you know, were pretty interesting. So for example, they said it presented sound explanatory journalism, met high expectations of online viewers, used animations to illustrate concepts, photos lent visual impact and credibility, overall a strong package. So yeah, nice feedback on that. But wait a second, this project was paid for by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, right? So this was actually paid for by the very type of organization that the Society of Environmental Journalism is there to report on, right? We definitely were not in Kansas anymore at that point. So we started to evaluate, well, what is it? What's the characteristics of the work that we're producing that's important here? And so I used this story to set up really the next part of my presentation, which has to do with how we began using content in support of essentially marketing communications initiatives. We did continue with more Florida work, but we also began to use some of the storytelling techniques for B2B and B2C clients, travel, as well as health-related clients. But we never really knew what to call what we were doing. And a couple years ago, I came across a blog where they were starting to use the term content marketing. And I read the description of what content marketing was, and I started to think, this is kind of like what we've been trying to explain to our clients in terms of how they should be trying to communicate to their constituents via the web. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the content marketing definition, history and background, forces shaping the trend, and what it means to you. And we're kind of entering the death by bullet point phase of this presentation. I apologize for that. So content marketing is a communications approach to attract, acquire, and engage a clearly defined and understood target audience. It's a marketing technique utilizing relevant and valuable content, and it's designed to drive action. Now, this isn't really something new. In fact, John Deere is really, considered kind of a pioneer in this. They started a magazine called The Furrow, and they first started publishing this in 1895. And they focus in this magazine on producing quality content, editorial content, trends content, news. They've used top quality agricultural editors and journalists. It's a global magazine, and it's been successful because it offers trends and news, covers agriculture, crop science, new innovations, but most importantly, the articles don't push products. Now, we've all been on airplanes and we've seen in-flight magazines, so we know that doing storytelling within the corporate sphere, getting paid by corporations, is not really, particularly new. Here's United's Hemispheres magazine. Here's AAA's Journey magazine. How many people have AAA and get this magazine? There's some good content in it, right? I mean, am I wrong? This is really depressing. He looks better at 60 than I did at 25. It's just... So we're used to this concept of editorial content being produced by institutions of some form or another. It's been known under terms of custom media, corporate content, custom content, branded content, branded editorial, corporate journalism. I've been seeing the term brand journalism recently. But I kind of like the use of the term content marketing. I'll tell you why in a little bit more detail as we move along. Well, one thing I want to point out right now is that the interest in content, just judging by looking at some comparisons of search terms on Google, is that numbers of searches for the term content strategy right now are on a par with the number of searches of, well, in 2009, for social media in 2008. So I think the interest in content right now is starting to scale up kind of relatively to the same ratios as interest in social media has. And why is that? Well, institutions are beginning to think and they're beginning to act like publishers. And interesting, publishers are starting to look a lot more like marketers. So for example, here's a homepage for Scuba Diving Magazine, and I've highlighted on that the areas that are basically selling something from this homepage, selling a trip or selling a dive gear package or what have you. Now, just as a comparison, here's a homepage called Home Farming. Now, who do you think is the publisher of this? It's not John Deere, and it's not Better Homes and Gardens. It's Triscuit. Right? Now go figure. Now, why is that? Why would Kraft with a Triscuit brand be producing a project called Home Farming? Because they're starting to utilize what we're beginning to learn, and people are looking for content online that's relevant, compelling, educational, and entertaining, informative, and so on and so forth. Well, marketers are beginning to pay attention to this, and for sort of the rest of my presentation, when I say marketers, I'm really talking about any institution that has a need to communicate. So I'm lumping together in one group here, profit, nonprofit, and government agencies. So in 2010, 59%, there's a recent spending survey produced by an organization, really good blog, Junta 42. 59% of marketers will increase content spend. That's up from 42% in 2008, okay? 33% of budget spending is now on content marketing. And smaller companies are spending larger percentages of their budget on content. What's interesting about that is because investing in quality content actually kind of levels the playing field for companies that are competing, for example, with big companies. So what's driving this? So I'm going to go over 6 reasons that institutions may be using content marketing. First of all is changes in buyer and consumer attitudes. I think Tony's touched on this a little bit. Internet savvy audiences are generally more knowledgeable, okay? You have a question about something, now you're heading to Google and you're finding through Dr. Google answers to your health questions and things like that. There is resentment, basically, over interruption-style messaging. This has been, how many people in here have a TiVo? Okay, we're journalists, so we don't have the money for TiVo. So, but anyway, the point is that we're ignoring ads. We're just there's a bombardment of them. We're ignoring it, and it's just an interruption in our daily lives. And buyers, consumers, what have you, are becoming more accepting of quality content from non-traditional publishers. And at the same time, traditional media is less able to reach customers. Okay, we have plummeting newspaper readership. 71% of consumers are online 2 hours per day, but only 48% are on TV for the same amount of time. Many institutions, this is very an interesting thing to think about, have better client data than traditional media. Okay, so they're able to target market their clients better than traditional media. Shrinking ad budgets is equaling reduced content quality. Reduced revenues, reducing staff. But at the same time, people still need and seek information. And businesses are beginning to learn how to, or institutions, what have you, are beginning to learn how to produce quality content to fill those gaps. Selling is also more challenging. Traditional ads still do have a role. Geico, Absolute, Aflac, they're all memorable ads. I haven't bought any one of those 3, but I can tell you Aflac's a lizard, right? No, okay. Oops. Okay, so, but growth is centered on conversation. People do seek helpful and resourceful information, and they seek to help to share that. And content is driving those conversations. Also, tech is cheap. It's easy to use. So anyone now can create and maintain content through CMS-driven sites, blogs, e-newsletters, what have you. Anyone can also now manage large databases, okay? And doing your own email newsletter outreach and what have you. And anyone can do both of those fairly simply and inexpensively. And then finally, high-quality editorial, there's a high-quality editorial potential from businesses. So ad revenues have cratered, traditional editorial content has weakened, and by that I mean media, traditional media. And what's interesting, and I'm not sure how many people in this audience, I know I've had some questions and phone calls come in during registration, you know, well, you know, I'm an unemployed journalist, what kind of discounts do you have and things like that. There's a lot of people who are incredibly talented content creators, incredibly talented storytellers and editors, what have you, who are looking for work. So where, you know, are we reaching a point where these two are going to meet? I believe the answer to that is yes. So what's this mean for you? Businesses, nonprofits, governments understand the value of quality content. Many institutions don't know who will create their content. They may start off trying to serve this demand internally, but they may also find out how time-consuming and challenging that is. And so when traditional media is struggling, jobs and work can now be found in these institutions, in big institutions. So what can we do about this? Well, we can kind of close our eyes and wish this would all go away and we could go back to a happier time. But those days are gone. Trains left the station. So my advice is let's get over the ick factor. And by that I mean we can do meaningful work for large institutions that aren't necessarily traditional media outlets, okay? And this doesn't compromise any type of journalistic integrity. In fact, you use the word transparency. It requires transparency, and you know the individual brand of the reporter or the reporting team becomes paramount because you know basically people are only one click away of finding out if something's really truly bullshit or not. So this doesn't mean that you're creating advertorials. You can really create. Again, if we go all the way back over 100 years to John Deere. There's quality content that's been demonstrated being made under sort of the corporate umbrella. Now, it's kind of interesting to be talking about this one. Where are we in the top fill stage of this BP disaster? You know, I'm not saying that you know that there's going to be a really valuable project going out and talking about how you know BP really cares for the environment. How unbelievable has that ever been? How believable is that? Certainly going to be right now. Well, it'd be interesting if BP created like, you know, perhaps a story that said, we effed up, and then followed that storyline. Anyway, that's sort of my editorial. It doesn't mean selling out to the man. And for numerous business, nonprofit, and government institutions, there are many, many, many stories to be told. In fact, think of the different topics that with institutions that may be aligned with these different topics that could use great editorial content to engage their constituents, their communities, their target audiences. And if changing the world through your storytelling is something that's, you know, something that you're very, very interested in, you know, what I really like is this idea that Paul Hawken talks about in Blessed Unrest. There's over 1 million MPOs. And that's probably an underestimate. But in aggregate, this is the largest social movement in the world. And these MPOs are aligned with all different sorts of very moving, very interesting, compelling areas in which there's great story potential. And so what I wonder is, you know, where might we find the intersection of, say, corporate social responsibility funding and nonprofits who have a need to get their word out, okay? So the idea of content marketing, I think, is something that's worthwhile. keeping your eye on, because I think that there are definitely opportunities out there to get truly meaningful and compelling storytelling work. Recently, Junta 42, the company I referred to earlier, they recently launched the contentmarketinginstitute.com. They just launched it last week, actually. So I'd recommend following this if you're interested in this topic. And we are actually going to put on a content marketing boot camp similar to this sometime late fall 2010. So there's some contact information for me. Many of you we've already communicated by email. I thank you for your time, and for those of you new to Washington State, here's a pretty picture from our beaches on the West Coast. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.